I stood beside my father's polished mahogany coffin, my hand trembling slightly as I gripped the eulogy I had spent the entire night writing. When the lawyer's voice cut through the hushed chapel like a knife. "Excuse me, Miss Voss, but I need to clarify something about the will before we proceed." Every head in the room turned toward me, and I felt my stomach drop even before he continued. "Your father left his entire estate to your brother Adrian." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I actually stumbled backward a step, my heel catching on the edge of the carpet runner. Whispers erupted around me like wildfire spreading through dry grass, and I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes boring into me, watching my humiliation unfold in real time. My name is Alara Voss, and I'm 34 years old, though right now I felt about 100. I've always been the responsible one, the one who fixed problems and cleaned up messes, but I've also got this fatal flaw where I can never let go of injustice. Where every slight and insult gets filed away in my mind like evidence in a case I'm building, and my pride absolutely refuses to let me show weakness even when I'm dying inside. I spent my whole life trying to earn my father's approval, managing the family finances, fixing his legal disasters, covering up scandals that could have destroyed our reputation. And this was my reward. Across the aisle, my younger brother Adrian sat with this smug smile playing across his lips, not even trying to hide his satisfaction at my public humiliation. The lawyer kept reading, and each word felt like another nail being driven into my chest. The mansion on Lakeshore Drive, the 3 businesses, the investment accounts worth millions. All of it going to Adrian, the golden boy who had never worked a real day in his life. I felt something inside me crack and splinter like ice breaking under pressure. Then Adrian leaned toward me, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, and whispered in that condescending tone he'd perfected over the years, "You were always the smart one, Alara. Pity Dad finally realized he didn't trust you." That was the moment I decided that if my father wanted secrets buried with him, I would dig them all up. And I would do it right here at his funeral, in front of everyone. I sat alone in my car in the chapel parking lot 30 minutes later, my laptop balanced on my knees, staring at folders and files that glowed on the screen like little bombs waiting to explode. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely control the mouse, and I realized it wasn't fear making me shake but pure rage, the kind that makes your whole body vibrate with the need to do something. To act to make someone pay. For years, I had quietly handled the family's problems, covering debts, settling lawsuits, bribing officials when necessary, and my father had trusted me with every dark corner of the Voss empire. Which meant I knew everything, every dirty secret, every illegal deal, every lie we'd told to maintain our pristine public image. I opened the first document, and my eyes scanned the familiar text: illegal property acquisitions we'd made by bribing city officials. Shell companies hiding tax fraud that would land us all in federal prison if anyone ever found out. Records of Adrian's massive gambling debts that had been paid with company funds, while I was supposed to make the books balance. Part of me hesitated because exposing the truth would destroy the Voss legacy forever, and despite everything, some pathetic part of me still craved my father's approval, even though he was lying cold in a coffin inside that chapel. But the humiliation burned deeper than any loyalty I felt, and my pride, that damnable pride that had always been my biggest weakness, wouldn't let me just walk away and take this defeat quietly. I've always had this problem where I can't let things go, where every injustice demands balance, where I keep score of every wrong done to me, and eventually I always collect what I'm owed. The doubt crept in as I sat there staring at those files, because if I exposed everything, investigators would dig deeper, and some of those records bore my signature too. My handwriting on documents that proved I was complicit in crimes that could send me to prison. But somehow that thought only hardened my resolve, because if the family was going down, then no one would walk away clean, not Adrian, not me, not anyone who had benefited from my father's corruption. I closed the laptop and walked back into the chapel, my heels clicking on the marble floor, and I could feel my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it. The priest had just finished his generic remarks about my father's character when I stepped up to the podium, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. My father believed in legacy, I began softly, and I saw Adrian smirk from the front row, probably thinking I was about to deliver some saccharine tribute to the great Victor Voss. I clicked the small remote I'd hidden in my palm, and the projector behind me flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow across the chapel walls. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen, rows and columns of numbers that told a story of corruption and greed, and I heard gasps ripple through the room like waves hitting a shore. Legacy is built on truth, I continued, my voice growing stronger, and I clicked again. Slide after slide appeared, each one more damning than the last. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Forged documents with official seals. Records of bribes paid to city councilmen and state representatives. The priest looked absolutely horrified, his face going pale as he realized what was happening. "Those are lies," Adrian shouted, jumping to his feet, his face flushed red with rage and panic. "You're making this up," I smiled faintly and clicked to the next slide. "Oh, Adrian, the banking signatures are yours, see, right there. Your distinctive capital A with the little flourish you're so proud of." The murmurs turned into chaos, people shouting questions. Someone's phone camera flash, going off, as they documented this spectacular family meltdown. A woman from the back shouted, "The authorities are going to see this," and I nodded calmly. "That's exactly the point," I replied, and I felt this strange sense of calm wash over me, the same feeling I imagine suicide bombers must feel right before they push the button. This absolute certainty that what you're doing is right even though it will destroy you too. Adrian lunged toward the podium, but two of our cousins grabbed him, holding him back as he struggled. "You're destroying the family," he roared, spittle flying from his mouth, and I leaned closer to the microphone. "No," I said quietly, my voice carrying through the chapel's sound system. "Father already did that. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." Police sirens wailed faintly outside, and I realized someone had already called them, probably Mrs. Henderson from the garden club, who always loved a good scandal. Adrian's face drained of color as the sirens grew louder, and I saw the exact moment he realized this wasn't just about humiliating him, that real consequences were coming. The heavy chapel doors opened, and 3 police officers entered, their uniforms looking starkly out of place among the flowers and mourning clothes. But then one of them, a detective with gray hair and tired eyes, walked directly toward me instead of toward Adrian. "Miss Voss," Detective Hale said calmly, "we need to talk about these documents." Adrian blinked in shock, his mouth hanging open. "Wait, you reported yourself?" he asked, his voice cracking. I nodded slowly, feeling strangely peaceful. "I told you, no one walks away clean." "Not you, not me." "Not anyone." The detective took my elbow gently and escorted me toward the exit, while reporters who had somehow already gathered outside pressed against the windows with their cameras. As I stepped into the flashing lights, I glanced back at the chapel one last time and saw my mother sitting perfectly still in the front pew, her face blank. And I realized she'd probably known all along that this family was rotten to the core. For the first time in my life, the Voss legacy was gone, destroyed, turned to ash, and strangely I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a massive weight, and had finally set it down even though I knew prison was likely waiting for me. But just before the police car door closed, cutting me off from the chaos outside, Detective Hale leaned closer and whispered something that made my blood turn to ice. "By the way, Miss Voss, your father amended the will yesterday morning." I froze, my hand gripping the door frame. "What?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you talking about?" The detective pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. "This is the real will, filed yesterday at 9 in the morning." You were still in it. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and I felt like I might throw up right there. "That's impossible," the lawyer said. The lawyer read from an older version. This one here. Your father left everything to charity, the entire estate, every penny. He showed me the document, and I saw my father's signature, that distinctive scrawl I knew so well, dated just yesterday. The door shut with a heavy thunk, and I sat in the back of that police car, my hands cuffed in front of me, staring at nothing while my mind raced. I had just destroyed my entire family, exposed all our secrets, guaranteed prison time for myself and Adrian, ruined our name forever. And it had all been for nothing, because I wasn't even disinherited in the first place. The lawyer had made a mistake, or maybe Adrian had somehow gotten to him, fed him an old version of the will to humiliate me, knowing exactly how I would react. Adrian knew me, knew my pride, knew I would never just accept defeat quietly, knew I would burn everything down rather than let him win. And I had played right into it, let my flaws, my pride, and my inability to let go of injustice destroy everything. As the police car pulled away from the chapel, I watched through the window as reporters swarmed Adrian, who was being led out in handcuffs too. And I felt this bitter satisfaction, mixed with overwhelming regret. The revenge had been satisfying for about 3 minutes, that moment when I saw his face drain of color and knew he was going down. But now as reality set in, I understood what I'd actually done. I hadn't just hurt Adrian, I'd hurt everyone, all the employees who would lose their jobs when the businesses collapsed. All the families who depended on the Voss Charitable Foundation that would now be investigated and probably shut down. My mother, who would spend her final years dealing with this scandal. My phone buzzed in my purse, and the officer in the front seat said I couldn't answer it, but I could see the screen, and it was my mother calling. I wondered what she would say to me, if she would curse me for destroying everything, or if maybe some part of her was relieved that the lies were finally over. The detective sitting next to me in the back seat spoke again. "For what it's worth, Miss Voss, your father called me 2 weeks ago. Said he was worried about the family business, thought there might be some irregularities he wanted investigated quietly. He gave me copies of some of these same documents you just showed." I turned to look at him, confused. "What? Why would he do that?" Detective Hale shrugged. "Maybe he wanted to come clean. Maybe he was sick of the lies. Or maybe he knew he was dying and wanted to burn it all down himself but didn't have the courage, so he set things in motion and let nature take its course. We'll never know now. The thought that my father might have wanted this all along. That maybe he'd been waiting for someone to expose the truth, and I'd just been the one stupid enough to actually do it, made my head spin. We drove through the city streets, and I watched Chicago pass by outside the window. All those buildings my father had helped construct through his bribes and corruption. All those businesses that had thrived because of illegal deals. And I thought about how the whole city was built on secrets and lies, and how naive I'd been to think exposing the truth would somehow make things better. The news vans were already heading to our mansion, and I knew they'd be camped outside for weeks, digging through every detail of our lives, interviewing former employees and business partners, turning my family into a cautionary tale about greed and corruption. My phone kept buzzing with calls and texts, and I could imagine what they said: former friends distancing themselves, business associates scrambling to cover their own involvement, reporters demanding interviews. At the station, they processed me like any other criminal, fingerprints and photos and paperwork. And the whole time I kept thinking about that moment at the podium when I'd felt so righteous and powerful, like an avenging angel bringing truth and justice. When really I'd just been a bitter daughter letting her pride destroy everything because she couldn't stand being humiliated. They put me in a holding cell by myself, and I sat on the hard bench, still wearing my funeral dress, and I laughed, actually laughed out loud because the absurdity of it all was just too much. I'd spent my whole life trying to be perfect, trying to earn my father's love and respect, managing every crisis and solving every problem, and in the end, I'd created the biggest crisis of all. One that couldn't be managed or solved, one that would define the Voss name for generations. Hours passed, and eventually a lawyer arrived. Not our family lawyer, but a criminal defense attorney named Sarah Winters, who introduced herself briskly and sat across from me at the metal table in the interview room. Miss Voss, I'm going to be direct with you. Based on the documents you provided and your own admission of involvement, you're looking at serious federal charges. Tax fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, possibly RICO charges depending on how deep they dig. She laid out my options in clinical terms, and none of them were good. I could cooperate fully, provide testimony against Adrian and the other family members involved, maybe get a reduced sentence of 3 to 5 years. Or I could fight it, claim I was coerced or didn't understand what I was signing. But she didn't think that strategy would work given my education and position in the company. "What would you do?" I asked her, and she looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, I would have never been in this situation because I wouldn't have exposed everything at my father's funeral. But since you did, I'd cooperate. Take responsibility, show remorse, help them build cases against the really bad actors. You might salvage something." I nodded slowly, realizing that even now, even after everything, I was still trying to fix problems and manage crises, still trying to control the outcome. Some habits die hard. Sarah left, and I was alone again with my thoughts, and I kept replaying that moment when Adrian whispered those words to me, kept wondering if he'd planned it all. If he'd somehow orchestrated the whole thing, knowing exactly how I'd react. 3 days later, I was released on bail that I paid with my own savings, not family money, because all the accounts were frozen, and I returned to my apartment in the city. The building's doorman wouldn't meet my eyes, and I realized everyone knew. Everyone had seen the news coverage and the endless analysis of the Voss family corruption. My apartment felt like a tomb, silent and cold, and I sat on my couch staring at my phone as messages continued to pour in. Some were hateful, calling me a traitor and a criminal. Some were sympathetic, saying I was brave for exposing the truth. Most were from reporters offering money for exclusive interviews. I ignored them all, and instead I pulled up the news coverage, watching clip after clip of the funeral footage that someone had recorded on their phone. Watching myself click through those slides with this calm expression, while chaos erupted around me. I looked powerful in those videos, in control, and I realized that was what I'd wanted, that moment of power after a lifetime of being controlled by my father's expectations and Adrian's manipulation. But power had come at a cost I hadn't fully considered. Adrian was facing even more serious charges than me because the gambling debts and the company fund embezzlement were all in his name. And part of me felt vindicated that he was suffering worse than I was. But another part of me, the part that wasn't consumed by pride and rage, felt sad that it had come to this. That our family had disintegrated so completely that we were actively trying to destroy each other. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became a media sensation, with courtroom sketches on the evening news and legal experts analyzing every piece of testimony. I sat in the defendant's chair day after day, listening to former employees describe the culture of corruption. Watching as prosecutors laid out the complex web of illegal activities that had funded our lavish lifestyle. Adrian and I weren't allowed to speak to each other, but sometimes our eyes would meet across the courtroom, and I'd see this mixture of hatred and betrayal in his expression that probably mirrored my own. My mother attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with perfect posture and a blank expression, and I couldn't tell if she was there to support me or to witness my downfall. During my testimony, I was asked why I'd exposed everything at the funeral, and I tried to explain about the will and the humiliation and the years of feeling unappreciated. But as I spoke, I realized how petty it all sounded, how my pride and my need for validation had led me to make such a destructive choice. The prosecutor asked me directly, "Miss Voss, do you regret your actions?" And I paused for a long time before answering honestly. I regret that I let my emotions override my judgment. I regret that I hurt innocent people who had nothing to do with the family's crimes, but I don't regret exposing the truth. My father built an empire on lies and corruption, and eventually those lies would have come out anyway. Maybe this way, with everything exposed at once, we can actually start to heal. The jury deliberated for 3 days, and when they returned with the verdict, I felt strangely calm, almost relieved that the waiting was over. Guilty on most counts, though they did find that I'd been somewhat coerced by my father into participating in certain activities. The judge sentenced me to 4 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 2. And while the bailiff led me away, I looked back at the courtroom one last time and saw my mother sitting there with tears streaming down her face, the first emotion I'd seen from her in months. Prison was exactly as terrible as everyone says it is. The loss of freedom and privacy and dignity, the constant noise and tension, the feeling of time stretching endlessly ahead. But it also gave me time to think, to really examine my choices and my character flaws that had led me to this point. I started seeing a prison therapist, a woman named Dr. Martinez, who didn't let me get away with blaming everything on my father and Adrian, who made me confront my own pride and my inability to forgive, and my need to always be right and in control. "You couldn't stand being humiliated," she said during one session, "so you chose to humiliate yourself even more spectacularly, to go down in flames rather than bend. That's not strength, Ilara, that's self-destruction." Her words stung because they were true. I'd always thought of myself as strong and principled, but really I was just stubborn and proud, unable to adapt or compromise, always keeping score and demanding payment for every perceived slight. I wrote letters to people I'd hurt, employees who'd lost their jobs, business partners who'd suffered because of the scandal, even to Adrian, though I never sent that one. In the letter to my brother, I tried to explain why I'd done it, how his words had triggered something in me that I couldn't control. But as I wrote, I realized there was no explanation that would make it okay, no justification for destroying everything out of spite and wounded pride. I was released after serving 22 months and emerged into a world that had moved on without me. The Voss mansion had been sold to pay restitution and fines. The businesses had been liquidated. The family name that had once opened doors now closed them. I found a small apartment in a different neighborhood and got a job doing bookkeeping for a small nonprofit, using my financial skills to help instead of to hide crimes. My mother and I spoke occasionally, brief phone calls where we talked about nothing important, both of us avoiding the elephant in the room. Adrian was still in prison, serving a longer sentence because he'd refused to cooperate and had tried to fight the charges, and I wondered if he thought about me. If he regretted whispering those words at the funeral, or if he felt vindicated that we'd both ended up destroyed. The twist came 6 months after my release, when I received a letter from my father's old attorney, the one who'd read that false will at the funeral. He wanted to meet with me, and I almost didn't go, but curiosity won out. We met at a coffee shop, and he slid an envelope across the table. "I should have given you this sooner, but with everything that happened, I wasn't sure if you deserved it." I opened it and found a letter in my father's handwriting, dated the day before he died. It read, "Ilara, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you know the truth about everything. I'm sorry for the burden I placed on you, for making you complicit in my crimes, for favoring Adrian even though you were always the stronger one. I changed the will to leave everything to charity, because I didn't want either of you fighting over blood money. I knew Adrian would try to cheat you somehow, would probably give the lawyer an old version of the will to read at the funeral, because that's who he is. I also knew that you, my brilliant daughter, would never let such an insult stand, that your pride would demand satisfaction. I hoped you'd expose him, ruin him the way he deserves. What I didn't expect was that you'd be brave enough or foolish enough to include yourself in the destruction. That takes either tremendous courage or tremendous stupidity, and I'm not sure which. I'm proud of you, Ilara, even if this isn't the legacy I intended. You were always the one willing to do what was necessary. Your father, Victor." I read the letter 3 times, feeling this complicated mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. My father had known, had predicted all of it, had essentially set up a situation where Adrian and I would destroy each other. And he'd called it bravery, when really it was just me being unable to control my worst impulses. The attorney watched me carefully. He loved you, in his own twisted way. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Love isn't supposed to feel like this, I said quietly. Love isn't supposed to destroy you. I walked out of that coffee shop, and I didn't cry because I'd cried enough in prison, had shed all the tears I had for my father and my family and myself. Instead, I felt this strange sense of closure, like a book being shut after a long and painful story. I still had my flaws, still struggled with pride and the need to be right, still kept score sometimes even though I tried not to, but I was working on it, trying to be better. Trying to build something real, instead of maintaining a facade of perfection. The Voss legacy was dead and buried, and in its place was just me, Alara, no longer defined by my family name or my father's expectations. Just a woman who made terrible choices and paid for them, and was trying to figure out who she could become. Some days I still thought about that moment at the podium, that rush of power when I clicked that remote and watched everything burn. And I wondered if I would make the same choice again knowing what I know now. Honestly, I'm not sure I wouldn't, and that scares me more than anything. The knowledge that even after everything, that part of me that demands justice and balance and revenge is still there. Waiting, keeping score, and maybe it always will be.